Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Autumn Vick, and today for my presentation, I decided to explore Albert Glaze's On Brooklyn Bridge, also known as Sir Brooklyn Bridge. To begin, just a little bit about Albert Glaze, since he is the artist of On Brooklyn Bridge. Glaze was born on December 8th, 1881 in Paris, France, and passed away June 23rd, 1953 in Avignon. Glaze was a French painter who was very well known for his Cubist paintings, as well as promoting the Cubist art movement, or the Cubism art movement. Just a little bit more. It was his lifelong passion to promote the Cubism art movement, just to add that in there. Moving on to analyzing On Brooklyn Bridge, I believe that On Brooklyn Bridge is based on the actual Brooklyn Bridge, hence the name, which is located in New York City. And when Glaze created his painting, he wanted to represent the modern feeling of New York, even though it was still not New York still being built, but still progressing. But yeah, it still had a modern feeling, which I believe can be seen by the abstract feel you receive when looking at the painting. Because there's not really any conform shapes in the painting. Like, you can find shapes, but they're not really complete in a way. But yeah, so next I would like to move on to a little bit about the style itself. So On Brooklyn Bridge is a prominent example of Cubism, which I will explore in a minute. The geometric shapes are very telling of the style because they create a dynamic image of the Brooklyn Bridge. And when I mean dynamic image, you can't really find the bridge, yet you can still kind of tell it's there with the structures in the painting. But yeah, I also think the colors played a big part in the industrial feeling that the painting gives off, as well as what the actual Brooklyn Bridge is like. And what I mean by that is, even though you can find splashes of colors such as reds and blues, I find that the gray and still the blue give an industrial feeling, like the browns, the greens that you can find. But you can also see like the lights, because it's a city. It's in New York City. You can tell that I feel like you could tell that he was trying to create the feeling that the city gave him. But what is Cubism actually? It is said that Cubism was a revolutionary new approach to representing reality, invented in around 1907 to 1908 by artists Pablo Picasso and George Braque. I would like to say that obviously artists can create a movement, but it's other artists that keep the movement going. And since art is how we communicate, I feel like art being passed through the movement is how other artists influence others and communicate it. And while Cubism was very prominent in the 20th century, it's believed that it began obviously in 1907 with Picasso's painting, but which is where the first fragments of Cubism can be seen. But also, I believe that Cubism opened up infinite new possibilities for visual reality in art, because usually reality would include realism, but seen in Cubism, there's a lot of abstractness involved instead of realism, which I found very interesting. And I believe that it was a starting point for many later abstract styles that you could find now in the modern world. But basically, I feel like by breaking objects and figures into distinct areas, which you can kind of see in the paintings, there's lines that kind of separates different things, that artists really kind of try to show different places, but all in the same painting, which I find very cool. Moving on to the historical context of basically Glaze's life was basically that there are many events that I believe that could have possibly led to his progress with his artwork, such as World War I, in which he was re-enlisted into the army, because he was already enlisted into the army before, even though he publicly and very outspokenly detested militarism via his paintings. He was still in the army. But Glaze also visited New York City a few times and was amazed by the city's energy, which I find very interesting in a way, because it's It said that he visited New York City like 2 to 3 times, but just off those visits alone, he created paintings that resemble the city and the life within the city, which I find very interesting because it's like just seeing something one time and being so amazed by it that you just want to create artwork is just very cool in my opinion. As for the Cubism movement, it seemed like Glaze was very intertwined with the movement. Like I said before, it was a very lifelong passion of his, especially since he was a self-taught Cubist artist. I believe that all artists are self-taught, but self-taught in a way. But the fact that he didn't have an actual teacher to teach him what the style was, and he just used his influences and basically his own mind to create many of his art pieces is very crucial to me in a way because it's important almost. But during the creations of some of Glaze's other paintings, there's a surge in the Cubism movement. Because once people saw what Picasso and other artists were doing, they realized, I guess, how interesting this style was and wanted to create more. So more creations like Cubism, which is what caused the surge. To add on, not to say that there was like an abundant amount of people just trying Cubism, because I wouldn't say it's a popular form. I wouldn't think that any form of art is considered popular, but yeah. But influences, so starting with Glaze's influences, like who he was influenced by. He was influenced by many people such as Picasso, who was the starter of Cubism, as well as George Braque, who's also a starter, and Piet Mondrian, and many other artists with like a like-mindedness. I feel like when you're influenced by someone, you want to be influenced by someone whose values align with yours. So the fact that Glaze was influenced by Picasso and Braque, who were like the starters of Cubism, is really interesting. I also included some of the works by these artists here. And I would like to point out before my next slide that there's not really a pattern that you can find between these artworks. They're kind of just like their own individual paintings, even though these two right here are by the same artist, but you could still find like the individual ality of like all the paintings gathered here. Especially this one, it's kind of like who's the odd one out, and I feel like you'll be able to point out this painting right here. But all these like artists were at some point involved with Cubism for their creations. Moving on to who Glaze influenced him, like other artists. So I believe that all artists influence like each other. It's almost like a circle. So since like say it starts with Picasso, he influences Glaze, and Glaze influences other artists. Even though it may have not started Picasso, it's kind of like a circle. Like it didn't really technically start with someone. It's just an ongoing circle that just gets bigger. Which is just my thought process. So it doesn't go without saying that Glaze influenced others with his creations, such as Evie Hone, Robert Puyen, and Degas, however you would like to pronounce that, and other artists. I would like to say that maybe you won't recognize some of these names, maybe you will, but as for the paintings, you can, unlike these paintings here, you could kind of find a pattern, especially with the color and almost the style of the paintings, which I find kind of interesting because for these paintings, for the people who influence Glaze, I said they have their own individuality for their paintings, but not saying that these paintings here don't, but you could kind of see, it's like you could point out who influenced them. But for Glaze, you could be like, oh, I might not know who influenced him, but when you pull up the paintings, oh, then I might gather. But for these, it's like, it's kind of right in front of your face. But for my ending comments, I would like to say that Cubism kind of challenged like traditional art techniques, because you could tell that's very different from traditional art values. And I also think that the use of like the geometric shapes and like perspectives is like very interesting. Like even though I didn't include many different forms of Glaze's work, I really just wanted to focus on Brooklyn Bridge because that's kind of, I don't know, it caught my eye when I was looking through all of the museums and like just galleries. I don't know why. I've never been to New York or anything like that, but I don't know. I was very enamored by it because it was just like it was different from other paintings, but I couldn't really put my finger on why, and I wanted to figure out like the symbolism behind it, kinda, and kind of like the influence it had. But yeah, I think Glaze took a great approach to Cubism because it kind of fits. I feel like On Brooklyn Bridge fits in with Cubism. If you could say, oh, I don't know what Cubism is, and you bring up On Brooklyn Bridge, you could kind of see what the style is about in a way. And I feel like Glaze had a lasting impact on not only Glaze but Cubism itself had a lasting impact on the world and history, especially in the place of like modern art, because it kind of changed what the meaning of modern art was for many people, in my opinion. But yes, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching.